Okay, yesterday we were learning on page 16a. We went over the Mishnah, which spoke about workers coming down from the tree or from a wall in order to recite the Shema. And we said that they don't have to, but they do have to come down for davening for Shemoneh Esrei. And we mentioned that a chassan is exempt from Shema up to 4 nights. And then we said a story of Rabbi Gamliel who got married and he still said the Shema. And the reason he said the Shema was because he didn't want to remove Malchus Shamayim, the kingdom of heaven, even for one moment. So even though under normal circumstances, a person in his day would not have said the Shema, but Rabbi Gamliel, he said the Shema. He was on a much higher level. I did see a explanation from Reb Chaim Volozhiner that explains this Mishnah. He explains that the point is that under normal circumstances, in other words, a regular person doesn't have Malchus Shamayim constantly. He accepts it in the morning. And therefore, for him to go accept, and he accepts it in the evening, when he says Shema. And therefore, for him to go and accept Oil Malchus Shamayim when his mind is not there, he would not be advised to do it, because it's something that's beyond him to be able to accomplish, to really accept the yoke of heaven. However, Rabbi Gamliel was the opposite. He was constantly with Oil Malchus Shamayim. He constantly had the yoke of heaven on the forefront of his mind. So for him, if we were to tell him not to say the Shema, it would have been like saying, remove the Malchus Shamayim, remove the yoke of heaven for you. So for a regular person, it's accepting the yoke of heaven. For Rabbi Gamliel, it's like removing the yoke of heaven. And this, he said, that I'm not obligated to do. I don't have to remove it. I have the yoke of heaven on me. He was allowed to say the Shema because he felt the yoke of heaven on him, even though he had gotten married that night. And so that is the meaning of this story, that for him, being on his level, meaning that he has the yoke of heaven naturally, it's constantly on him. For him, to not say the Shema would mean to remove the yoke of heaven. That he's not obligated to do. He's not obligated to remove it. And then the Gemara spoke about the laws of the first paragraph of Shema versus the other paragraphs of Shema, that a person would be allowed to be doing his work and reciting the Shema. And then we spoke about the obligation of a worker to recite the grace after meals. And we mentioned that there's 2 types of workers. There's a worker that gets paid money, and there's also a worker that gets a meal for his work. And the person who gets a meal, the worker that just gets a meal for his work, it doesn't obligate him to his boss as much as someone getting paid. And therefore, if you just get a meal, you're allowed to bench fully. You have the right to bench the complete benching. The person who's working, who's a worker, who's getting paid, for him, he's supposed to recite a abridged version of the grace after meals. But there is an exception to that, and that is if the Baal Habayis is sitting with them and eating together with them, so then they follow the rules of the Baal Habayis, which is, in other words, they are obligated to bench to do the grace after meals as a regular, as everyone else does. And then the Gemara spoke about what is the exemption of a chassan. A chassan, a groom who's just got married, he would be exempt from the night Shema. And the question is, what exactly is the exemption? And the truth is, we did learn this earlier on. We had this same Gemara, and the Gemara really is like a repetition of that Gemara, but it applies here because the Mishnah here it deals with a chassan, and because of that, it's brought here. This is the main place where it's brought, and the Gemara mentions that a person who's oisek b'mitzvah, a person who's involved in a mitzvah, is exempt from another mitzvah. So the thing is that if a person's involved in a mitzvah, they're exempt from another mitzvah. So naturally, you may say, well, a chassan, the groom, is involved in a mitzvah, getting married, and that itself should exempt him from another mitzvah. Our Gemara says, no, you need an extra verse to exempt a chassan. So it sounds like there's two things. Number one is a person involved in a mitzvah is exempt from another mitzvah. And number two, a chassan, a groom, is exempt from the mitzvah of Kriya Shema. Why is he not included in the first category of someone who's involved in a mitzvah? And he should be exempt automatically from that exemption. Why does he need his own exemption? So the truth is, Rashi asked this question on page 11. On 11a, Rashi did ask this question. I believe we spoke about it. And Rashi says that if not for an extra verse, we would not exempt a chassan. You need to have an extra verse, an extra word in the verse to exempt a chassan. And the reason is because all we know from the initial exemption is someone who's physically involved in a mitzvah, that he's exempt from another mitzvah, but not someone who's tarud b'machshava, someone who is concerned in their thoughts. That he's concerned about, about his mitzvah that he's about to perform, and therefore it's hard for. Therefore, he should be exempt from saying Shema. That we wouldn't say automatically that he's involved in a mitzvah. He's exempt from another mitzvah. He's not really involved in a mitzvah. He's thinking about a mitzvah. His mind is involved in a mitzvah. His body is not really involved yet in a mitzvah. He's concerned about what's going if everything's going to go smoothly with regard to being his nervousness of maybe she's not going to be a virgin and so on. And we spoke about the laws of that. So that is the reason why we need an extra verse for a chassan. And then, so the Gemara said, so a chassan is exempt because he's more concerned with it's more of a concern rather than a physical mitzvah that he's involved in. So the Gemara says, well, that sounds similar to someone who has other concerns or worries or pain. For example, the Gemara says, what about a person whose boat is sinking? And the Gemara says, oh, a person, the Gemara says, what about, we find that an Avel is obligated in all the mitzvahs except tefillin. And obviously he's very concerned or in pain. And so the conclusion of the Gemara is that there is a tirda dirashus and a tirda de mitzvah, that there is a difference between being concerned and involved in thought of a mitzvah and being concerned and being overwhelmed when it's just something of rishus, something that's not an obligation, something that's not a mitzvah. And there it would not exempt one from saying Shema. And so that is the conclusion of the Gemara that we learned yesterday. Yes, Ben. Ben, did you
I wanted to say that the last time they mentioned it, the physical mitzvah was digging a grave. So, and the Chassan was the tirda. Here they're talking about the worker, which is busy on a tree, which is also physical, and the Chassan is only a tirda. So, and I don't know how the boat sinking, fits into it altogether. Because with the boat, it's not a mitzvah. I don't see what the mitzvah is.
So the point is that the Gemara initially had asked, what about if a person marries an almana, a widow? And the Gemara says, well, with a widow, you don't have the concern of her virginity because she was already married once. So the Gemara, right. the Gemara is asking if it's because of a mitzvah, then a widow also. You're concerned of a mitzvah. The Gemara says no. There's no. It's all about concern. So the Gemara says, oh, it's about concern, not about the mitzvah. So then the same thing should apply if a person's concerned about their boat. Then if it's about concern, in other words, the Gemara was debating what is the exemption. Is it the spiritual pain or is it the physical? In other words, is it about a mitzvah pain? Is it pain about a? In other words, is it a concern in one's mind about a mitzvah, or is it concern in one's mind about something physical? So if it's about a mitzvah, the Gemara said that maybe it should apply to a almana. So the Gemara said no, it doesn't apply to a widow. So it must be a concern about the something that's concerning. So if it's something that's concerning, it's going to cause a person not to be able to concentrate well on the Shema. So that should exempt someone who's both, because they're all about the concerning. The Gemara concludes, no, it's really a mixture of both. It's a concern for a mitzvah. So it's a combination of both. There has to be it's not just doing a mitzvah, thinking about a mitzvah, because thinking about a mitzvah is not enough. It has to be a concern. So therefore, so again, there's the fact that you're thinking of a mitzvah, or you're concerned about a mitzvah, or just concerned in general. And the conclusion of the Gemara is it's a combination of both. It's a concern, not just thinking about it. Because if the exemption is thinking about a mitzvah, then a widow is also thinking about the mitzvah. They're not concerned, but they're thinking about the mitzvah that they're about to do. But the Gemara's conclusion is no, it's a concern, and so it has to be something concerning, but it also has to be concerning about a mitzvah, not about a divar reshus, not about something that's not a mitzvah. Okay, so we are now about to start the next Mishnah, and the Mishnah talks about the laws of avelos, mourning. And there's two stages to avelos. There's two stages to mourning. One of them is called oinen. An oinen is someone whose relative died, and they are considered an oinen until the burial. They're considered a oinen. I'm not sure how you would translate it different than.
No, I'm not going to be able to hear it because it's screwed up by my audio.
Both of them would be considered like a mourner, someone who's grieving. An oinen is someone whose relative just passed away and they haven't been buried yet. And there is a question among the commentaries: when do the laws of velos really begin? For example, can a person take a shower with hot water before the burial? But the Mishnah starts off, Rachatz Laila Harisha in Shemesa Ishtay. The Mishnah starts off that Rebbe Gamliel took a shower the first night that his wife passed away, and she was buried that day. And in truth, he was really considered a Avel already. He's considered a mourner. Once they close the, once the grave is filled or the casket is closed, the laws of mourning kick in. And so the law of not taking a shower should have applied to Rebbe Gamliel. Now, the laws of not taking a shower means a hot shower, and he should not have been permitted to do that. So, but it says in the Mishnah he did that. Rachatz laila harishon. He took a shower. He washed himself the first night. Shemesa Ishtay, that his wife died and was buried that day. And Amru like Talmidav, his students told him, Limaratano Rabbeinu, our master taught us, She'avel asur lerchaitz. An avel is prohibited from washing. A mourner is prohibited from washing. Amar lahem, eini keshar b'nei adam. So he said to them, I am not like other people, istanisani. I am a very some type of phobic. I am clean phobic. I am, I'm not sure how to translate istinus. Let's see.
Fastidious.
Okay.
Fastidious.
Yeah. Is that the way they translate it? Okay, we'll use that word, fastidious. So, Rabbi Gamliel was allowed to take a shower because he was called a istinus. And Taisvus explains that the reason why he was exempt is...
Rabbi,
yes.
Rabbi, they say I am delicate.
Delicate.
Steinsaltz, that his body was delicate and he actually suffered when he took showers or bathed.
Right. Okay.
Anyway,
so that's the point.
Sorry.
According to law, the idea of mourning is not to enjoy. Person's not allowed to have enjoyment, and it's therefore these laws are prohibited. These things are prohibited, taking showers and so on. But in Rabbi Gamliel's case, being that he was delicate or fastidious, it was painful to him not to. So in his case, it wasn't about pleasure, it was about the removal of pain. He's in pain. And being in pain, that would exempt him, that would allow him. In other words, the laws are not to make someone in pain. The laws of Avelos, mourning, is not that person's supposed to be in pain. It's about not to get pleasure. If a person's in pain, that would be a reason why maybe they should be exempt from the law, because the goal is not to cause pain. It's just not to enjoy pleasure. So therefore, he said that he was allowed to take a shower because he's a istinus. Now, the students, it's interesting how they mentioned to him that they thought he was wrong. The way they rebuked their teacher, Limaratano Rabbeinu, didn't our teacher teach us that an avel, a mourner, is prohibited to wash? So what they were saying is that the proper way, what we see from here is that the proper way to, tell a teacher off is to, in the most respectful way, is to say, didn't you teach us this and this? Our master taught us this and this. And so please explain why you're doing the opposite, why it looks like you're doing the opposite. In other words, you don't go to your teacher and say you're wrong. You have to, this is the appropriate way to approach a teacher. Didn't you teach us this and this? And so he answered them that he's a istinus. Now the Mishnah continues and it says, Uchshames Tavi Avdoi, when Tavi, his servant passed away, Kibel Olav Tanchumen, he accepted consolations for his student. Amru Loi Talmidav Limaratonu Rabbeinu Shein Mekablim Tanchumen Alo Avadim. So they told him off, but they said it in a nice way. They said, his student said to him, didn't our master teach us that you don't accept Tanchumen, consolation, for slaves? And this was a slave who died, and you're accepting consolation. And so the commentaries do ask on this Mishnah. They say, what does it mean that you don't accept consolations for slaves? You don't accept consolations for anyone that you're not related to. So the commentaries explain that since Tevi was his student, in other words, he had taken in so much from Rebbe Gamliel that he was considered like his relative. And so you may have thought that he should receive Tanchumen, consolation, for when his slave died. So Rebbe Gamliel answered, my servant Tevi is not like the other servants. Kosher haya, he is kosher. So that itself is an interesting statement. Yes. Yes, I'm listening, Ben.
You said that you're not allowed to take a hot shower.
Right.
But doesn't say that Rabbi Gamliel took a hot shower.
So that's the understanding, is that he took a hot shower.
So what are they complaining about?
That he did. He's not supposed to.
Okay.
He shouldn't have.
Shouldn't have taken a shower.
Yeah, I understand.
Point.
Yeah.
So the Rebbe Gamliel he answered the students that my slave, I'm going to accept consolation for him because he was kosher, and which means he was medactic in mitzvahs. He was careful about the obligation, the mitzvahs that he was obligated to do. He was careful in. And it's brought in the Yerushalmi that a student, a servant that serves his master properly, it's considered like a son. So he was considered kosher. That's interesting. Okay, so now the next part of the Mishnah continues about a chasan. A chasan, we originally said, is exempt for the night of the wedding from saying Shema, and it says, if he wants to say Shema, he is allowed to. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Loi kol haroitze litol es Hashem yitol. Not everyone that wants to take the name of someone who's careful in mitzvahs and pious and someone who's not everyone who wants to take that title can take it. And the reason being is that it looks like he's showing off. You know, as if a person's on the level to say Shema and concentrate, it's one thing. But we shouldn't just allow people to just say, you know what, I want to say Shema the night of my wedding. It does look a little haughty or showy, that you're showing off when you're saying, like, I am able to have kavanah and it looks a little showy, and therefore a person shouldn't do that. So that's the argument between the first opinion and the Mishnah, that anyone who wants to say Shema could, and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who said it's not necessarily appropriate. Now, Tosfos over here mentions that, not here, actually on the next page, Tosfos mentions that nowadays this doesn't apply because we don't have kavanah, and therefore everyone should say the Shema properly because it doesn't look like he's showing off during these days. It just looks like he's doing his obligation of saying Shema. He's not showing off because no one really has this great concentration during the Shema. The Gemara begins, my taima de Rabban Gamliel. What is the reason of Rabban Gamliel? Why does Rabban Gamliel why was he allowed to take a shower? And the Gemara answers, Kosovar aninos laila de Rabbanan. He holds that the law of aninos at night is rabbinic. And Rashi over here says that even though this is the night of her passing, and the Torah does talk about aninos, there is a law in the Torah that says that a person is not allowed to have Meiser Sheni, the second tithing, when they are an oinen. So the Torah itself talks about that there is a concept of a person whose relative passed away, and it has laws regarding that. For example, they're not allowed to eat Meiser Sheni. And the understanding is that since the laws of, there is a term called aninos in the Torah, a term that an oinen, that there is a concept of someone who's grieving, and they're called an oinen. The Gemara understand, or Rashi's understanding, it's obvious biblical. It's written in the Torah, so it would seem like such a person would not be allowed to take a shower. So. So the explanation is that the night after the passing is only rabbinic. The real aninos of the Torah is the real oinen is really only applicable before the burial. Let me just make sure I'm translating that correctly. Hold on a second.
Oh, we can't have anything.
So the night after the day, in other words, after the burial, the day would be biblical, but the night after it is not judged with the day that it comes after. Rather, the night is considered rabbinic, similar to the other days of mourning called Avelus. So in Rabbi Gamliel's case, because he was an istinus, what we're trying to prove is that it's only rabbinic and not biblical. That's really what the goal is. Because once we say it's rabbinic, then we will have an exemption of saying that, well, the rabbis didn't enforce their rule in such a case where he's an istinus, where he's delicate. And therefore, we're trying to if we hold that it's rabbinic, we could say the rabbis didn't enforce their rule. So that's so there's Einan D'Oraisa, there is a level of Einan, a person who's grieving and more from a fresh death of a relative, and that would be Einan D'Oraisa, and that would apply even after the burial during the daytime until night. And then at night would kick in the rabbinic Aninus, which is the night after, and that would be only rabbinic, similar to the days of Avelos, of a regular, the 7 days of Avelos, which is also rabbinic. And therefore, in a place of istinus, a place where someone is delicate, like Gozru Bey, Rabbanon, the rabbis did not decree. So that's the first little piece of Gemara. Then comes the next Gemara about servants. And when Tavi, his servant, passed away, etc. So the Mishnah said that normally a person doesn't take consolations for their eved, for their servant. And one of the reasons that's given is because let's see it in the Gemara. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis learned, Avadim u'shvachos ein oimdim aleihem b'shura. We don't make a line, a row, on each side, on two sides. We make two rows where the mourner would pass through. Even nowadays, they do that at a funeral. After the funeral, they let the mourners pass through. So, and the people who are participating, they wish their condolences to the mourners. And the law is that an eved and a shifcha, a manservant and a woman servant, a maidservant, you don't make the row after the funeral for them. And we don't say the blessing of Avelim for them. And Tanchume Avelim, and we don't do the regular Nichom Avelim where we wish consolation to the master. We don't do that for an Eved. Maisa, and the story goes, Umeisa Shivcha Shel Rabbi Eliezer, that the Shivcha, the maidservant of Rabbi Eliezer, passed away. Nichnasu Talmidov Lenachamai. So the students entered to console him. Kivan Shara Oisam, when he saw them coming to console him, Allah La'aliyah, when he saw them, he went up to the attic because he didn't want them to console him, being that they're not supposed to. This is for a servant, a maidservant. But they didn't seem to catch on. They followed him. They followed him up to the attic. He went to the side room and small room before the hall, and nichnasu achrav, they went after him. Nichnas letraklin, he went into the big hall, and nichnasu achrav, they entered after him. Amalahem, he told them, kimaduma ani, I thought sha'atim nichben b'paishrin, you would get burned with lukewarm water. In other words, I thought you would understand, you would catch on, you would get the hint. When I kept on moving away. And Ashav, and now, you didn't even get burnt. You didn't catch on even when I poured hot water at you. Meaning that, didn't I teach you, like didn't I teach you that servants and maidservants, we don't stand on, we don't do the rows. We don't say the blessing of Avelim, and we don't say the Tanchumen, the Nichum Avelim. We don't do the consolation of the Avelim. Ela ma oimrim aleim. So what do you say to someone whose servant passed away? Keshem she'oimrim loy la'adam. The same way you tell someone, Al shoyre v'chamoyrei shemesu, if their ox or donkey died, what do you say to them? Hamakam yamale l'chasreincha. Hashem should fill your loss. Hashem should fill your loss, and that's what you tell them if their ox or donkey died. So the same thing you tell a person for their servant or their maidservant. Hamakam yamale l'cha chesrencha. Hashem should fill your loss and should give you pay you back for your loss. Tanya Idach, and we have another brisa that also talks about servants and maidservants. Avadim u'shvachos ein maspidin oisan. We don't eulogize them. Rabbi Yosi says that im eved kosher who oimim olav, if he was a righteous, a kosher eved, you say on him, Ish toy v'neman, he was a good person. V'nene miyagiyoi, he made a living from his hard work. And v'nene miyagiyoi, he was a good person, a v'neman, a trustworthy person. V'nene miyagiyoi, and he made a living from his hard work. Amrulai imkain ma hinachta l'ksherim. So they told Rabbi Yosi, they said, so you're allowed to say a few of these positive qualities, but you're gonna ruin it for people who the regular people. What would you say to them? That's more than that. In other words, it's very nice that you're elevating the honor for the servants, but what it's causing is a degrading for regular people, because you're going to say the same type of thing for regular people. They'll say the same term. So therefore, they argued with Rabbi Yosi about giving a eulogy, that you shouldn't even give such a eulogy, for you shouldn't give any eulogy, really. So that was their claim. That the reason why we have to be careful with honoring, well, I guess it deserves thought. What is the reason for this? Why are we so against? What's wrong with consoling someone for the loss of their servant? I guess maybe it makes it worse. Maybe it implies. It implies like it's like a person could mourn more than they really should. In other words, there's a certain, the Torah almost tells you that what it's appropriate to mourn over, maybe something along those lines, that a person should understand the boundaries of how they should feel.
Rabbi?
Yeah. I'm just throwing a thought. I'm not really sure. It's an interesting question. So
I,
there is a
I
different Gemara.
think maybe
Yeah.
yeah, I would think that I would think it minimizes the importance of saying it for your family member or another Jew
Okay, that's a good point.
by saying it for a non-Jew.
Right. So that's okay. That sounds like a good explanation. Thank you. Anyone else? The truth is, yeah, Miranda.
Yeah, I think they're in the culture itself was very different than ours. And maidservants and slaves were, I don't know, were considered almost like beasts of burden versus, for some reason, I don't think it's fair, but I think that the culture itself was very different. So perhaps that's the case.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Just like an Evid, wouldn't the Shifcha also, if she did all the things of following the mitzvot, etc., would be considered to be a kosher individual, and perhaps in this situation, her. I know I was reading one of the other stories. Perhaps it was in Chulin, in which whenever the Talmidim of one of the rabbis would come in, the person that was there would always say particular words to the students so they would understand what, in which context to approach the Rav at that time. And so therefore she was more of a yoetz, an advisor. And in that sense, perhaps the students considered her to be more than just a simple shifcha. And that's why they came to be Menachem Avel to the Rav. And he didn't take it as such, but because of the way they probably were treated by her, they felt that it was a big loss for the Rav, and even though he may not have seen it as such, they may have seen it as such.
So you're saying this is a Gemara somewhere in Chulin?
I think it was either Gemara and Chulin. But I'm not
definitely like.
I really don't remember.
It. Okay, if you do come across it, sounds interesting. I was just going to bring the. I see in the back of one of the Gemaras I have. They have different commentaries. So he brings over here that one of the reasons is that we're afraid that people will accept them as regular Jews. In other words, it'll imply like maybe they are kosher Jews, and therefore people might end up marrying into their families and so on. And this was a way of clarifying that don't remember that they are considered servants, slaves, and you're not allowed to marry into their families, even though they did this, when a person becomes a slave, they do a partial conversion and they're obligated in mitzvahs like a woman, but they're not full-fledged Jews. They're somewhere in the middle. And because of that, we always have to be concerned that they might end up being accepted into the community. And this was a way of separating, making sure that didn't happen. Now, Rebbe Gamliel had to have an excuse. Why was he allowed to do this? Because Rebbe Gamliel, it would seem like, wasn't he concerned that Tevi, people would know that people would think maybe that he's he's now accepted into the community. And so the commentaries explain that for Rebbe Gamliel, maybe we'll see it later on the Gemara, that people knew him. And they knew Rebbe Gamliel. It was like public knowledge. Everyone knew that he was a servant. Everyone knew that he was never freed because Rebbe Gamliel was more popular and well known, and therefore people would know, or maybe because Tevi was well known for his righteousness, because of that, people knew that that's why they're accepting consolation, and not because he actually was acceptable and became Jewish. In other words, it was because he was known for his righteousness. Okay, Robert, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, again, in reading a lot of the different tracks, this is the time when they were Jewish slaves or just non-Jewish slaves.
So these are non-Jewish slaves, but the truth is, when they do work for a Jew, the Jew is supposed to circumcise them, and they become responsible. They go to the mikvah and they become responsible for mitzvahs like a woman, meaning they don't have to study Torah all day. They don't have to put tefillin on, but they would be obligated in keeping, some of the laws of Shabbos, and the many of the laws of Shabbos, the laws of the prohibitions, and so on. So they would have certain laws, but they were not allowed to marry a Jew.
Okay. So I guess my concern is that by doing that provides them with a greater being of humanity, essentially, that it gives them versus their being low life, quote unquote, and not have any countenance. I don't know if that's the word, but any sense of I'm having difficulty verbalizing, but again, by bringing them closer to Judaism, it provides for some kind of elevation of them in service to the rabbi, or being sort of that somewhere on a continuum of Judaism. It's the best way I can try to, but not being fully enfranchised, but It gives them some redemption of some sort of life.
Right.
Rabbi Smith?
Yeah.
A question?
Yeah.
Was there any kind of conversions from non-Jew to Jew? Did they have anything like that when this was all written?
For sure. There was full-fledged conversions. Yeah, definitely.
But was it slaves could be fully converted or could not be fully converted? I guess is the question.
So there are examples where a slave was, if they were freed, then they would enter status of being fully Jewish.
So it's a control factor then in some respects. As being a slave, they're still subordinate to a fully enfranchised Jew.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of wording it, Robert.
Yeah. Well, I'm just trying to sort all that out. I don't have a value on it, but just understanding the psychology, the understanding of that.
Right.
Can I ask
delayed or something?
There definitely were converts. I mean, conversion is part of the Torah. There are laws in the Torah, but at the same time, we also don't encourage converts. If they want to convert, they can.
You smell something, it's you.
Right.
And we encourage them. We want to make sure that they're sincere and so on. Did you want to ask something else? Yeah.
Does Judaism really, say slavery is all right? Does Judaism teach that to own a person or to have a person as a slave, that's morally all right?
So it's a little different than nowadays. The slave in those days was someone who sold themselves on their own initiative to be a slave.
Okay.
And
like an indentured servant. I'm sorry, an indentured servant gets a salary, etc.
Is that what they were?
I'm not sure if they would get what type of salary, it was more that they were going to be provided for, completely provided for. And they shouldn't have to worry at all of the regular worries of a person that they have to pay our mortgage, and we got to pay electric bills, we got to pay these bills and that bills, and we could get sued. We could, all different issues that we're always concerned about. The slave was someone who didn't want to take any of those responsibilities in life. And he says, I can't deal with, doing all, I just want to have a job, and I want you, Hashem, provide me everything. They're not Jewish, but I'm saying, like, I want someone to give me everything I need. I can't cook. I can't do this. I'm going to work. You just provide everything. That was the idea of a slave. Slave mentality is they don't want to take responsibility. They just want to have everything given to them, and they will work, but they don't want to feel the obligations and responsibilities. And
wasn't he supposed to be freed after 7 years?
Yeah.
So that's a Jewish slave. That's a Jewish slave. That at the end of 6 years he works. That's a slave that the Torah talks about, where he doesn't have money to pay for his what he stole, and therefore he is freed at the end of 6 years. He only works for 6 years. Yes, Miranda.
Rabbi, weren't they part of the household too? A lot of the maidservants and people, they actually lived on the grounds, no? Or is that not the case?
For sure. For sure they lived on the ground. Yeah. So that's the story of the maidservant. I mean, it's a little vague about the level. Were they considered Jewish or not? I said they're somewhere in the middle. I must say it is a little vague. On the one hand, if they're obligated in mitzvahs like a woman, sounds like they're fully Jewish. They just can't marry a Jew. They're not allowed to marry because they have a certain pagam. They have a certain blemish on them they're called slaves. On the other hand, they can't be counted for a minyan. Well, they're not counted for a minyan is not surprising either, because then again they're obligated in mitzvahs like a woman. But there is this sense, we call them an Eved Kanani. We do call them a non-Jewish slave. So it does seem like they're definitely somewhere in the middle. Like are they really? Would we call them Jewish or not? I'm not really sure. I guess we could look into it. I have a encyclopedia called the Encyclopedia Talmudis, but they're not up to the letter ayin, Eved Kanani. They're still in the middle of printing it. So I don't think I would find anything there, because it's the letter ayin is like towards the end of the alphabet. They're still on the letter like samach or nun, but maybe the new volumes. I have to find out if they've come out with some new volumes. I bought it.
Maybe you'll find it on the Knani. Maybe on the
Knani,
Knani they'll mention Evet Knani.
The truth is I haven't bought the new volumes in a long time. I got the set maybe about 20 years ago. So maybe by now they're up to. I have to find out. Maybe they've come out with the letter I, and we could check out what all the different opinions about an Eved Kanani is. But when you learn about it, you generally get the feel that they're not considered Jewish. That's just the understanding, but it could be wrong. Could be that maybe we should consider them Jewish, and just like they're not, then they don't have the full-fledged laws, and they're not allowed to marry a Jew, but maybe they are considered. Maybe we should call them Jewish. It's something I'll have to look into. It's not. It's a little unclear in my mind. So the Gemara that we were learning, we just concluded that the laws about giving honor upon the death of or giving respect upon the death of a servant. Oh, I see Tosfos over here. He actually says this reason that I mentioned. Maybe you're gonna lift them up to yuchsin, to allow them to marry Jewish people. If we were to make the rose for them after their funeral, it would give the implication that maybe they were really Jewish. Now the question is, if they died, what does that mean? They died already. How are we going to marry them to a Jew? What does it mean that
others like them?
Well,
there's others like them that didn't die. So
but their descendants, their descendants.
The descendants, I think, would be maybe the explanation here. Their descendants, or maybe
Rabbi Smith.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. With Rabbi Steinsaltz, it seems to be emphasizing that there should be a difference between the relationship between a master and a servant, and that's not like a family. doesn't really talk about Jew, non-Jew. It's talking about a person might mistake, no matter how close this servant was, and he treated him like a family. You shouldn't mistake him that he's an actual family member. He's a servant. It's more like a monetary relationship for starters. No matter how close they were, it's a financial relationship between the master and his servant, and no matter how close they were, it's not like a family relationship.
And what is the reason? Why are we so concerned about that? People might think it's family.
Because they're just different. There's different ways that a person treats his family as opposed to his friend. It could be even his best friend. It doesn't have to be a servant. It could be his best friend. But people shouldn't mistake the closeness, meaning implying that it's a family relationship when it's not a family relationship. He doesn't really go into the reasoning why. It could be for what you're saying regarding, intermarriage and intermingling, etc. But he just emphasizes. They're not emphasizing there in the Gemara with Steinsaltz the idea of Jew and non-Jew. It just says. The relationship between the master and the servant's not like a family relationship. So therefore, it has to be treated differently. It's only, right. That's why they say, may Hashem replenish your loss, because it's a financial relationship, a financial connection. That's what he says.
Now, I'm just wondering if what you're saying is sort of like the reason why we do all these things, but that way we make a difference for the slaves, and we don't do these certain respects. Is Rabbi Steinsaltz saying the reason is because people will think that they're related then to the family, and if people think that they're related to the family, I mean, it just seems like what do you lose? What's going to happen? So I guess their children. I guess that would mean their children maybe are related. In other words, why don't they deserve, just because they're not related to the family?
Rabbi,
shouldn't they deserve to have like proper? So I guess my question is this. Let me rephrase my point, David. There are two things here. One is receiving consolation, and who receives consolation? Only a relative. Another thing is respect. For example, standing on making a line, making lines for the mourners. Okay, so I guess you're right. I guess the mourner, they're not mourners because they're not relatives. Okay, I was going to say that making the lines was like respect, but it's really for the mourners, specifically for the mourners. So the only other thing would be the birchas avelim. And right, it would be a blessing.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Okay, that's a nice point. Thank you, David, for bringing up that point. I think Ezra had his hand up for a long time. Ezra?
Well, we're talking about not treating them as family. There are certain family obligations, especially when it comes to Yehusha and things of that nature. So if in fact you do treat them like family, then their family members can turn around and say, my father, who was your servant, you treated him like a family member, so therefore shouldn't I receive a portion of the Yehusha of
Oh.
Okay, so it's possible. So I mean, that might be an explanation according to what David was reading from the Steinsaltz.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, that's a very interesting point, Ezra. Okay, so these are things I guess we would need to look into if there's any validity to that concern. That's an interesting concern. Thank you, Ezra, for bringing that up. That's an interesting concern. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say they shouldn't receive anything more than a friend of yours would receive. They should receive less. So, and I think you don't do those things for a friend. And why should you do it for an Eved?
Right. Right. Okay.
Your family is just like another man that you know. He works for you.
Uh-huh. Okay. Right. I mean that's along the same lines as what David was saying. Like you happen to have a business relationship with him, but he's not a relative. You know. So yeah, I mean he's just a friend.
Yeah.
It's not no more than a friend. Okay. Yeah. Okay. It sounds like a interesting point, and I wonder if what Ezra said, if there's any connection with that. Like, are we concerned at all about financial matters? I mean, and I wonder if that is a different opinion than Tosfos, because Tosfos emphasizes this idea of making them into like kosher, considering them like people that one could marry into. And that, you know, that sounds like something different than claiming that it's a monetary there's a monetary issue. So that as well should be looked into, I guess, if this is a different opinion than what I quoted from Tosfos over here, which seems to emphasize the other idea of marriage into their family. Okay, well, I guess we're gonna call it a day. Everyone have a wonderful day.
Rabbi,
See you later. Yes.
Thank you.
I just wanted to tell you while you're on the subject, I'm just seeing inside the Steinsaltz Gemara that Tavi was the most famous servant in the entire Gemara. They say he was on the level of Eliezer, the servant of Abraham.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Who says that? Where is it?
It says some go as far as to draw a parallel between Tavi, the servant of Rabban Gamliel, and Eliezer, the servant of Abraham. Doesn't go into the source here. I think he just says it it's under personalities where it says Tavi. It explains who Tavi is.
Okay, great. Okay. All right. For those that are going to be in the afternoon class today, I just want to mention there's going to be a guest speaker tonight, this afternoon. So I'm actually not going to be there for the beginning part, at least. So if you might need to help him out with the muting everyone, or you might want to give him some tips. But anyway, I'll see you tomorrow, Mirza Hashem. Sei gesund, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Stay safe, everyone.
Okay.